Spencer, your host on Authentic News right here on RBN Live this 27th day of March 2025. Couple of stories in the offing. A colleague just reminded me a couple of days ago we had a story the UN had investigated and discovered that Israel could not be conducting the genocide in Gaza without the weapons and financing provided by the United States. Ergo, it follows the UN has found the United States guilty of genocide. And get this, in relation to Yemen, a story, I'll have it tomorrow in detail, 6 Jewish United States senators intervene to promote going ahead and attacking Yemen now, rather than delaying for a month, as Vice President Vance had suggested. This is very powerful evidence that the American government is not being controlled by those we elected, but rather by the Jewish Zionists who are controlling the United States. And not for nothing is it called the Jew-United States of America. Very, very distressing. I'll have more about this tomorrow. The American people are gradually awakening to the fact that they do not have control of their own country, that the government they elected is following the dictates of a foreign power. This is totally un-American. This is not what we voted for, and it could even constitute a form of treason, in my opinion. We're going to have a lot more about this. Meanwhile, turning to Ukraine. Responsible statecraft reports, even if the war ended tomorrow, Ukraine could end up broke by 2026. There's a gaping hole in Kiev's finances that no amount of tax increase or Western donation will be able to fill. There is no plan in place to fund the Ukrainian budget after 2025. Even if the war ends by the summer of 2025, it'll take some time to reduce military expenditures, leaving European nations on the hook. It's not clear that European elites have fully understood the political costs. However, much longer the war continues. With intensive U.S. brokered negotiation ongoing in Saudi Arabia involving separate Ukrainian and Russian delegations, hopes are rising that the Trump administration will finally be able to bring an end to the war. But even if the war ends tomorrow, it would be unwise to assume that Ukraine could reduce military spending close to pre-war levels. Ukraine will be broke. Meanwhile, here is a report, the Truth Seeker. Trump war fails, Yemen's missile strike destroy U.S., Israel exposed with Ben Norton.
Yemen launched its Palestine 2 ballistic missile into Israel, claiming it has hit the Nevada air base. Also, it has launched missiles and drones at the USS Harry Truman after 72 hours of bombing by the Trump administration into Yemen. And now the big news, too, is that Trump has greenlit the Israeli re-invasion of Gaza after the threadbare ceasefire expired. Israel kills more than 400 Palestinians in a 24-hour period. This is an absolute disaster. In my assessment, this is also a disaster for the Trump administration. But what is your assessment? In some ways, this is just an incredible about-face in such an early phase of this new peacemaker administration, as it claimed.
Yeah, it's hypocritical in so many ways. I mean, of course, we know that U.S. politicians are very often hypocritical. But in the case of Trump, we saw that he claimed that he would be the peace candidate. He claimed in his inauguration speech that he was going to pursue peace, although he also claimed in his inauguration speech that he would expand the territory of the U.S., and he threatened to colonize the Panama Canal and other parts of the world, Greenland. So he's always had this very contradictory rhetoric. But here we are, and just 2 months in, Trump has massively escalated the U.S. war on Yemen, the poorest country in West Asia. I just saw a tweet from CENTCOM, the U.S. military central command, and they boasted that they're bombing Yemen 24/7. That's the language they use, 24/7. Trump also restarted this genocidal war in Gaza. Israel would not have taken this decision were it not given approval from the U.S. And it was reported by Trump administration officials that Trump personally gave the green light to Israel, to Netanyahu, to restart this war and to tear up the ceasefire that he helped to broker. Of course, right before he came into office, Trump told Netanyahu, who is a close personal friend, he said, you have to pause this war because you need to give me a reputational boost. As I come in as president, I want to portray myself as the peace president. And then now here we are 2 months later, and Trump said, go ahead, continue the genocide. By the way, it's not just my opinion, it's not just your opinion. This has been stated very clearly by multiple United Nations committees that this is a genocide. Multiple experts in international humanitarian law. There have, for instance, the United Nations, just a week ago, they published another report by one of these special committees. They often create these special committees that feature professors of international law and legal experts, and they come together and they study certain issues. And they've done this on Gaza, and they have repeatedly said this is a genocide. According to the legal international definition, the Genocide Convention, this meets the definition. And this is why South Africa introduced a lawsuit against Israel in the International Court of Justice, accusing Israel of genocide. And the justices, the judges at the ICJ, which is the top UN legal authority, ruled that Israel can be investigated on accusations of genocide, that there is a legitimate case to be made. And, of course, many other countries in the Global South have joined South Africa in this case, including many countries in Latin America, Nicaragua, Bolivia, Mexico have joined this case, several other countries in the Global South. And, of course, there's also this case in the International Criminal Court, although we see why people in Africa have long referred to the ICC as the International Caucasian Court, or I prefer International Colonial Court, because Netanyahu has an outstanding arrest warrant, and yet Netanyahu constantly is traveling to the U.S. He was just in the White House in Washington a few weeks ago, meeting with Trump. No consequences. Israel flew over French airspace, and the French government that claims to be a supporter of freedom and democracy, and they even claim to support the ICC, they did nothing. They allowed this wanted war criminal who's wanted by the ICC to go to the U.S. So what this really shows is that the ICC arrest warrant was marketing. I mean, I was always I hate to sound cynical, but I was always very skeptical about it. I knew they would not act on it, and now we see that. And furthermore, by the way, right after Trump came back into office, he put sanctions on the ICC. This didn't get a lot of attention because Trump literally signed hundreds of executive orders, and it's easy to get distracted by all of the crazy things that are happening. But, the Biden administration was threatening to put sanctions on the ICC. Trump put sanctions on the ICC, and here we are. And then, just a few days ago, the ICC arrested the former president of the Philippines, Duterte. And, of course, this is obviously because Duterte was very friendly to China. The current leader of the Philippines is the son of the longtime dictator whose crimes were way worse than Duterte's crimes and never faced any consequences.
I think that's all correct. So now we have the peace president, Donald Trump, who's going to end the wars. He's going to make America, for the first time, guilty of genocide. Genocide. We're never going to live this down. Absolutely disgusting. Meanwhile, we have a massive buildup. Stealth bombers reportedly deployed to America's unsinkable carrier. The U.S. is reportedly deploying stealth bombers to a tiny island, often referred to as Washington's unsinkable aircraft carrier, located between Africa and Indonesia, about 1,000 miles south of India. The island offers stealth bombers strategic access to the Middle East, Central and South Asia, and the Indian Ocean. The move comes as President Trump launches a new campaign against Iran-backed Houthi rebels who have attacked more than 100 merchant vessels with missiles and drones in the critical maritime choke point known as the Batman Strait. Well, we have more about it. Scott Ritter is really apoplectic about what's going on here. Listen to this, a tweet where he reports it really distressed. For some reason, it's not showing up. It's very striking. he enumerates all the different types of weapon systems that are building up. And here we go, more about it. U.S. builds massive force on Diego Garcia. Is war with Iran near? We're on the brink. Are we on the brink of war with Iran? That's a looming question as significant U.S. military buildup in the Indian Ocean has raised alarms. 7 B-2 Sprint stealth bombers, 10 aerial refueling tankers, at least 3 C-17 cargo planes have been spotted at Diego Garcia, a British island territory that's historically served as a launching pad for U.S. military ops in the Middle East. The timing is critical, with tensions rising over Iranian support for Houthi militants and growing concern over Tehran's nuclear ambitions. But remember, we just reported yesterday, Tehran has no nuclear ambition. Tulsi Gabbard, Director of National Intelligence, reported to the Senate that the intelligence community concurs Iran is not developing nuclear weapons. Now, we know for decades, Bibi Netanyahu has been insisting the opposite. He's had silly little cartoonish drawings and all that sort of thing. He's presented at forums as august as the UN, but it's all been nonsense. It's all been bullshit. So now we're going to attack Iran on the basis of bullshit? Why would that not surprise me? Meanwhile, live blog, 96% of Gaza does not have water. Plus, Hamas spokesman killed an Israeli airstrike in northern Gaza. They also took out a leader of the Houthis by demolishing a whole apartment complex. There must have been 200 people in the apartment complex. They were going after one guy. This is collective punishment. This is a war crime all by itself. And there's the U.S. leading the ban. It is absolutely unreal what's taking place. Meanwhile, Israeli troops run over a Palestinian with a bulldozer. Israelis laugh about it on social media. How disgusting. Israeli media has published this footage of an Israeli armed bulldozer running over a Palestinian civilian in Gaza. Quds News Network. The video was published on a popular Israeli Telegram channel with nearly 130,000 followers for depraved minds to laugh. Very, very bad. I'm just appalled. But what else should we expect? That's the Israeli way. It's happened before. Rachel Corrie was a peace activist. They bulldozed her to death, too. Meanwhile, U.S. warns Egypt to accept Gazans or lose billions in aid. This is extortion. This would be a criminal act in a civilian context. Absolutely outrageous. Listen to this. President Donald Trump's administration has delivered a final order offer to Egypt to accept up to 700,000 Gazans. According to a new report that says the proposal includes billions in economic aid and a warning the same deal will be offered elsewhere if Cairo refuses. On Monday, the U.S. based and Qatari-owned Al-Arabi Al-Jada reported U.S. message was relayed to UAE President Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, who met with Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi during a visit to Cairo over the weekend. So it's extortion. This is a Trump way of doing business. If you don't do it my way, I'm going to clobber you, I'm going to attack you, or I'm going to deprive you of massive aid. This is disgusting. Completely disgusting. Here, Jewish Plan for the Future, Un's Review. A prominent Jewish futurist talks about Jewish future. Matt Singer was a Jewish co-founder of Hudson Institute and self-styled futurist. Hudson Institute is a right-wing think tank originating from Rand Corporation with a unique, future-oriented perspective, according to its marketing material. Singer's best-known co-founder was Herman Kahn, fellow Jew and the most celebrated nuclear strategist of his day, who had the dubious honor of being the model for the mad ex-Nazi scientist Dr. Strangelove in the movie directed by another Jewish celebrity, Stanley Kubrick. Wonderful film, one of my all-time favorites. I regard this as the most important movie ever made, Dr. Strangelove. Max Singer, the Jewish futurist, wrote an article titled "A Futurist Looks at the Jewish Future, 1987, for the magazine Mosaic, an online Jewish publication of Jewish ideas, religion, politics, and culture. Here, there are various quotes about it, but mark my words, what's going on here is catastrophic. Meanwhile, Trump shows his true colors. The truth seeker. I'm sorry to say they got it right. This is Chuck Baldwin, who turns out to be a brilliant political analyst. Trump won a landslide election last November, primarily on the promise to stop America's stupid wars. It is now obvious to everyone while Trump might be able to negotiate a deal to stop the war in Ukraine, a war Russia had already won. He's decidedly intent on accelerating and expanding U.S. wars in the Middle East. But as soon as I tell the truth about the morbid duplicity of Trump's mind and the moral derangement of Trump's heart, evangelicals ferociously respond with examples of the good things he is doing, as if any of that erases the evil he's inflicting on both America and the world. Evangelicals are eaten up with the disease of prophetic dispensationalism and see Trump as a harbinger of their eschatology. Prophetic dispensationalism is a moral and spiritual cancer that befalls the brain and hardens the heart, and it's an epidemic among evangelicals. I well remember when I was a young pastor, I heard several prominent fundamentalist evangelicals use James 5:20 to justify any act of wickedness they might commit in the same way they use Genesis 12:3 to justify every act of wickedness that Zionist Israel commits. James 5:20 says, "Let him know that he which coveteth the sinner from the error of his way shall save a soul from death, and shall hide a multitude of sins." Their interpretation of this verse was that if a Christian was a soul winner and won people to Christ, God would hide the multitude of the saved soul winner's sins. In other words, as long as a Christian was a soul winner, none of his sins mattered, no matter how vile or wicked they might be. That's the same mindset of today's Trump toadies. As long as Trump is doing something right, he cannot be condemned for anything he does wrong. But Donald Trump has chosen a course that could lead America into World War III and turn our constitutional republic into an authoritarian dictatorship where the fundamental mark of a free society, freedom of speech, is eviscerated.
When I was younger, so much younger than today. He got hair down to his knee. Got to be a joker, he'd just do what he pleased.
Well, here are some of those good things Trump's doing that I'm sorry to say can't excuse the evil. Trump orders government-issued ID requirement for federal election voters. Very appropriate. Why hasn't this been the case in the past? Americans care deeply about fair elections. Indeed, they are a cornerstone of our democracy. When citizens cast their ballots, they expect only eligible voters to participate. Imagine walking into Canada or Mexico as an American citizen and trying to vote in their elections. There's no way they'd allow that. And yet Democrats think this should be normal in America. And most patriots know why. For years, questions have been persistent about exactly who is casting ballots in our elections. The integrity of our voting system has remained a constant concern among many Americans. State-level efforts to address these issues have seen mixed results, with some jurisdictions actively resisting verification measures. The problem, alas, has continued to grow. In a significant move to strengthen election security, President Donald Trump signed an executive order Tuesday requiring proof of American citizenship when registering to vote. The order demands that all ballots be reviewed by Election Day, addressing long-standing concerns about election integrity. It's an honor to sign this one, Trump remarked at the White House signing ceremony. I signed all of them, but to sign this one is a great honor. I agree. Meanwhile, here's another. Trump tackles election integrity with sweeping executive order will punish states that don't comply. The order will cut federal funding for states that refuse to take steps to secure their elections. That's the Department of Homeland Security, with ensuring that illegal immigrants are not voting, adds a citizenship question on the federal voting form for the first time. It's also ordered DOJ to vigorously pursue election crimes, particularly in states that are out of compliance with federal law on election security, and seeks to ensure compliance with National Election Day rules. The order also calls for the prosecution of foreign interference in U.S. elections, like paying a British spook to produce a fabricated hoax against a candidate, which nothing is ever done about, even now. Like it. That's all to the good. Meanwhile, Signalgate. Trump team brings Leo Conterno into Yemen attack planning session. What in the hell is going on here? We began discussing this yesterday. In one of the most bizarre foul-ups, or was it, of all time, Trump National Security Advisor Mike Waltz invited the Atlantic's editor-in-chief into a Signal discussion group where the admin's attack on Yemen was being... I'll be right there. I gotta take the break early, Mike. I gotta deal with an issue.
Look at all the lonely people. Eleanor Rigby picks up the rice in the church where a wedding has been. Lives in a dream, waits at the window, wearing the face that she keeps in a jar by the door. Who is it for? All alone. Nothing you can do that can't be done. Nothing you can sing that can't be sung. Nothing you can say, but you can learn how to play the game. It's easy.
Just to explain what was going on here, I was taking my wife to lunch today at our favorite steakhouse. And when I backed out of the car, my foot slipped off the brake and I hit a parked car. I went up to the home and immediately I knew it was a visitor. This is directly across the street, and let him know what had happened and explained I was taking my wife to lunch and I'll be back in an hour and a half, and took her to lunch. And of course, while I'm sitting there at lunch, I realized, my God, you're not supposed to leave the scene of an accident. So when I got back, I discovered that she, the party whose car I'd hit, had already called the cops. They'd already been out, photographed her, and written it up as a hit and run because I wasn't there. I departed the scene. But I had made contact with her and so forth. And when the officer came back, then I explained the whole situation, said I was, the idiot of the day, but that I had notified her and so forth, and we had subsequently exchanged insurance information. So I explained that there was a technical issue here of committing a hit and run, and he had to discuss it with his supervisor. And when he explained it to his supervisor, the supervisor agreed there was no intent to evade responsibility. So I'm only getting a citation for unsafe backing. I mean, thank goodness. I just want to let you know. So this was the officer coming back to the house to give me the ticket he'd had to write up to explain that I wasn't going to be cited for a hit and run. And I just wanted to thank him for being so professional and so thoughtful. In any case, that's what this was all about. Meanwhile, it wasn't a leak. It was a devious Charlie Foxtrot. I think there's something to this, as I explained yesterday. Charlie Foxtrot is a polite euphemism for a crude military term, cluster F. That describes a first scandalous Trump admin sometimes, whether deliberate or accidental. A Zionist journalist by the name of Jeffrey Goldberg was added to a Signal chat by Trump National Security Advisor Michael Waltz, or someone who works for Waltz. Goldberg suddenly found himself part of a group chat of Trump's top defense, diplomatic, and intel officials, including CIA Director Ratcliffe, DNI's Tulsi Gabbard, and Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, among other luminaries. We know what happened. Meanwhile, here we have Max Blumenthal on what the bombing of Yemen means.
Carry your leaks and being able to use him to move the message is especially important because Goldberg represents someone from the enemy camp, from the other side, but you share something in common with him. You both want to see the U.S. attack Iran.
So Max Blumenthal recently went on Judge Napolitano's podcast, Judging Freedom, to talk about the recent Yemen bombing leak that came out of Signal, and really what this says about Mike Waltz, Pete Hegseth, and others, but also what it says about the Trump administration and its foreign policy in general. So let's watch, let's react.
What's your take on this? How did Goldberg get into that mix?
Well, by Jeffrey Goldberg's own admission, he received a Signal message from Mike Waltz, the National Security Council director, 2 days before he was apparently mistakenly brought into the 19-member Bomb Yemen Signal chat of Trump national security principals and top Trump advisors. Why was Mike Waltz reaching out to Jeffrey Goldberg? Let's look at Jeffrey Goldberg's history. This is someone who, as a young man, was a follower of Meir Kahane and made Aliyah to Israel and became a prison guard at the Ketziot concentration camp, guarding Palestinians during the First Intifada, wrote a book about it, sort of reformed himself, but remained a key bigwig within the Zionist world and became one of the Beltway media's top access journalists partially as a result of that. And so Jeffrey Goldberg, during the run-up to the Iraq War, was used by Dick Cheney to draw a link between al-Qaeda and Saddam Hussein. In The New Yorker, Dick Cheney cited Jeffrey Goldberg's reporting twice in Meet the Press appearances. Under Obama, Benjamin Netanyahu used Jeffrey Goldberg to try to push the Obama administration into attacking Iraq. Goldberg was pushing out all these stories that an Israeli attack on Iran's nuclear sites at Natanz was imminent unless the U.S. would step up and do something.
Yeah, it's no mystery why a person like Jeffrey Goldberg, even though ostensibly he comes from the other side, right? This is a muckraker that spread, left-wing hysterics about Trump, the fine people hoax, the losers and sucker hoax, all sorts of things like that. But he does happen to agree with Mike Waltz in virtually every way on foreign policy. And that's why Mike Waltz was one of Trump's worst foreign policy picks for his cabinet. A lot of people said that at the time. A lot of dissidents warned about that at the time. So I think we know how the two are connected. It doesn't make sense to me that he was included purposefully in this message, though. I know some people have said that, but it just comes off making Mike Waltz look really bad and Hegseth look like a propagandist. It doesn't make sense why he would do that when he could just spill the beans to Goldberg personally.
I think that's all very sensible. So I believe this was intended to deflect from the fact that Trump's committing genocide against the Houthis. I mean, now look, we got the UN committees already finding the U.S. supporting Israel in a way that they could not be committing genocide without the United States assistance, which makes the United States complicit in genocide in Gaza. And now we're doing Bibi's bidding by attacking the Houthis. And remember those 6 Jewish senators. I'll be reporting more about it tomorrow. This is all completely outrageous. Meanwhile, Trump slams the Atlantic after the magazine's editor received his top secret war plans going out of business. I don't think so. President Trump said he didn't know anything about an extraordinary security breach whereby a magazine editor was inadvertently included on a group chat with his entire security team strategizing about an upcoming military attack. The stunning revelations came Monday afternoon when the Atlantic reported on jaw-dropping revelations that editor Jeffrey Goldberg was invited to join a chat on the Messaging Act Signal that featured internal debates before the U.S. carried out military strikes on Houthi targets in Yemen. Some of the material was so sensitive that the magazine decided not to publish it. But the article from the group chat did feature Vice President Vance raising arguments against the decision to strike the targets. Pete Hegseth, Secretary of Defense, had texted me the war plan at 11:44 a.m., about 2 hours before it happened on March 15th, wrote Goldberg. Well, this is all bad. As I've been saying, while he's doing a lot of good domestically, he's doing a lot of very bad things in terms of foreign policy. I'm frankly appalled. Meanwhile, Doge wants to cut the Pentagon. Guess what? By 0.07%. His recently announced meager $580 million reduction is just an exercise in reshuffling. This is a legitimate complaint. Last week, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth directed the termination of over $580 million in Pentagon contracts, grants, and programs. They amount to less than 7/100 of the Pentagon budget. The elimination of this spending aligns with the administration's effort to reshuffle the budget to promote a wholesale reduction in military spending. That's what we were looking for. Secretary Hegseth made clear in February when he ordered his staff to drop plans to excise about $50 billion from the Pentagon budget annually for at least 5 years, only to offset greater spending in 17 priority areas, including further militarization of the border, needless expansion of the U.S. nuclear arsenal, and ill-conceived plans to develop a Golden Dome missile defense system for the United States. I agree. That is completely moronic. You couldn't do it. The United States is so huge, and by the way, I don't even think what Israel has is very effective. But Israel is like, what, the size of New Jersey? You're talking about a tiny, tiny project compared to the enormity. It would cost trillions. What a dumb idea. Meanwhile, divided federal appellate court rules to keep the order blocking Tren de Agua deportation flights in place. The order blocking them. This is bad. A divided federal appellate court ruled Wednesday that the Trump admin could not immediately use the 1798 Alien Enemies Act to quickly deport suspected members of the Venezuelan gang Tren de Agua. The 2-1 ruling was handed down 2 days after a contentious hearing before the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, in which the Justice Department tried to lift a 14-day stay imposed by D.C. District Judge James Boasberg. Yes, we know we're learning a lot about this guy. Meanwhile, boom, Marjorie Taylor Greene shreds NPR and PBS CEOs over previous statements calling Trump a deranged racist sociopath and promoting censorship. House Oversight DOJ Subcommittee Chairwoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, love her, eviscerated the CEO of a national public radio on Wednesday during a hearing and signaled potential prison time for possible violations of the Communication Act, as the Gateway Pundit has reported. Greene's subcommittee is holding a hearing this morning with testimony by NPR and Public Broadcasting Service CEOs as the committee seeks to potentially defund the far-left state propaganda stations. I think that, alas, is what they have become. Meanwhile, and I'm stunned. RFK Jr. touts Columbia University crackdown on anti-Semitism following Trump admin threats. Health and Human Services Secretary Robert Kennedy is touting, praising Columbia, bowing to the Trump admin threats by agreeing to restrict protests and mass, even turn their campus into a safe space for Jewish students. Instead of inspiring universal condemnation, the October 7th Holocaust triggered a global wave of anti-Semitism, Kennedy said in a statement Monday on X. Ivy League campuses became a greenhouse for poison. President Trump has ordered his cabinet to use every constitutional tool to uproot this divisive weed. I'm glad Columbia has agreed to this first step and will begin to restore itself as a garden of tolerance, reason, compassion, and respect, but also of censorship and absence of free speech. We must tolerate protest. That's one of the ways a society blows off steam without having to resort to revolution. JFK observed that those who make peaceful protest impossible make violent revolution inevitable. He got it right. There got to be ways to blow off steam in a society. Our First Amendment has been absolutely crucial to achieving that purpose. Meanwhile, Trump demands colleges name protesters and their nationalities. This is from the Washington Post. When federal civil rights attorneys launched an investigation in February into whether universities properly respond to anti-Semitism on campuses, they noticed something unusual about these marching orders from their bosses at the Education Department. An early step in civil rights investigation is always a letter to the university demanding certain information. Typically, the department asks how many discrimination complaints were received and what schools officials did in response. But the Trump admin told the attorneys to also collect the names and nationalities of students who might have harassed Jewish students or faculty, and frankly, this has nothing to do with harassing Jewish students or faculty, nothing at all. According to documents, and 3 attorneys with the Office for Civil Rights who have direct knowledge of the situation and spoke on the condition of anonymity because they were not authorized to discuss the cases publicly. This is very, very bad. Meanwhile, we got Phil Giraldi talking about Israel,
the race for Supreme Court.
talking about Israel attacking freedom of speech right here in the U.S. with Judge Napolitano.
Signal and the nature of what they were discussing. You, of course, are familiar with top secret security clearances, and you're familiar with national security.
So this is an awful and developing situation. Larry Johnson, of course, whom you've had on the show, recently, had some very interesting words and comments. He had an article today that came out this morning that is basically his spin about what this all is. He doesn't think deep down that this was kind of an accident. He thinks that this is very much contrived. There was one or several agendas, and I think that's probably a very, very good analysis.
Well, I'm going to play two clips for you. One is Mike Waltz.
Let me skip forward.
At a dinner or a banquet, your contents can...
We brought this guy into it, expecting him.
Too much on what we already know about. Meanwhile, Trump vows to investigate Michael Byrd, the killer cop who murdered Ashley Babbitt and has since been promoted. This, of course, was during the January 6th event. I watched this very carefully. Ashley Babbitt, in my opinion, was a crisis actor. She wasn't actually threatening anyone. Michael Byrd was there on the other side of the hall. He was not in fear of being harmed. She wasn't threatening him. And yet he shot her. And I got to tell you, I think he shot her with a blank. When she fell backward, I didn't see any evidence that she'd actually been hit. There appeared to have been a blood packet, a fake blood packet that was applied there. I think Ashley Babbitt is alive and well. And this was just part of the planning by the Democrats to guarantee they'd be able to describe the protest as deadly. In order to be deadly, there's got to be somebody dead. So what they did was fabricate a case where they could claim someone was dead, even if she actually is alive and well and maybe sipping Mai Tais in Tahiti. Bad, bad, bad. That's what we're up against here. Meanwhile, we have zero hedge on Biden's perjury. Part of the problem might be with the Freedom of Information Act, the timeliness of production. If you file a simple request, it might take over 7 years for a response. It happened to us, zero hedge. Even when you file suit like we do, you're probably looking at over a year to get responsive documents. And that's not even counting the exceptions the government asserts, whether it be privacy or the need to redact embarrassing information, or in the case of COVID, to further the cover-up. Yes. Meanwhile, we have a report about...
Thank goodness for the internet, because we can just pull up the clips. They all used to agree with Trump. Just saying.
These are Democrats for deportation. Listen.
Thank goodness for the internet, because we can just pull up the clips. They all used to agree with Trump. Just saying.
In the budget I will present to you, we will try to do more to speed the deportation of illegal aliens who are arrested for crimes.
Senator Biden, yes or no, would you allow the cities to ignore the federal law?
No.
I think we got to have tough conditions. Tell people to come out of the shadows. If they've committed a crime, deport them. No questions asked.
Undocumented workers broke our immigration laws, and I believe that they must be held accountable, especially those who may be dangerous.
Hear that again.
Because we can just pull up the clips. They all used to agree with Trump. Just saying.
In the budget I will present to you, we will try to do more to speed the deportation of illegal aliens who are arrested for crimes.
Senator Biden, yes or no, would you allow the cities to ignore the federal law?
No.
I think we got to have tough conditions. Tell people to come out of the shadows. If they've committed a crime, deport them. No questions asked.
Undocumented workers broke our immigration laws, and I believe that they must be held accountable, especially those who may be dangerous.
There you go. They were all for it. Meanwhile, the Democratic Party's own poll of 26 million voters shows major shift toward Republicans. Get this. Democrats face mounting challenges in today's political landscape. A party once confident in demographic destiny now confronts sobering realities. Their path forward appears increasingly difficult. Party leadership seems unable to stop the bleeding. And the bleeding is substantial. Here, A new analysis from Blue Rose Research, a Democrat-aligned data firm, reveals voters are abandoning the Democrat Party in droves. Indeed, their comprehensive study of 26 million voter responses delivers devastating news for liberals nationwide. The data doesn't lie. Even Democrat pollsters can't spin these numbers. Young voters were supposed to be a Democrat stronghold. Not anymore. Donald Trump dominated with the under 26 demographic across nearly all categories. Only minority women in that demographic remained loyal to Democrats and voted for Kamala Harris. The news gets worse for Democrats from there. Immigrant voters, once reliably blue, have dramatically shifted right. Precinct-level election results point to Trump making considerable gains in Black, Hispanic, and Asian immigrant neighborhoods throughout the country, states the Blue Rose report. Immigrant voters swung from Biden plus 27 in 2020 to Trump plus 1 in 2024. That's a 28-point shift. Americans care about their wallets. The Blue Rose Research analysis confirmed voters were far more concerned about cost of living than liberal pet projects. Climate change, student loan forgiveness, abortion, and LGBTQ issues rank low on voters' priority lists. The economy matters. Inflation impacts everyday Americans. Grocery bills don't care about your pronouns. Voters recognize which party offered practical solutions. They overwhelmingly trusted Republicans on economic issues. Most importantly, they believed Trump had the ability to make life better. Clearly, actions speak louder than empty progressive promises. Go figure. Harris faced another problem. Voters interviewed her as more ideologically extreme than Trump. Let that sink in. After years of media portraying Trump as a radical, Americans saw through the charade. The most shocking revelation might be about politically disengaged voters. Conventional wisdom held that higher turnout benefited Democrats. Not anymore. Blue Rose Research reported, with a combination of less engaged and less likely voters leaning more GOP, a larger electorate meant a more Republican electorate. Their analysis concluded if every registered voter had participated, Trump would have won the popular vote by nearly 5% instead of 1.5%. Boom. Democrats lack a clear national leader post-Harris. We've recorded all-time low favorability ratings. The 2026 Senate race looks bleak, following multiple retirements. Back and take your calls.